Tomorrow we go, Mom. I sold your beach home and Dad's car. Pack light. You won't need much in the home. That's what Kimberly said while sipping iced tea from the glass my late husband once brought back from Cuba. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't look at me. Just the sea outside, the one I'd watched grow angrier each year without him. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed and share where you're listening from. We love knowing how far these stories reach. The silence between us was louder than the waves crashing outside. I stared at her thinking she might flinch or smile, say it was a joke. But no, she stood, tugged down her designer blouse, and left the room. That was my daughter. Beautiful, cold, and ruthless when it came to things that didn't glitter. That house wasn't just walls and windows. It was where my husband taught Kimberly to ride her first bike on the gravel road behind the dunes. Where he left me his old keys on a chain before the cancer took him. Where the walls still smelled of eucalyptus and salt. And now, sold, just like that. I touched the spot where his key used to hang. She didn't ask, didn't care, but she didn't know my secret. And it was buried deeper than her greed could ever reach. I didn't say a word after Kimberly left the room. I just sat there, in the old rocking chair, the one with the woven arms my husband fixed when the sea air began eating at the wood. I looked up. The key was still there. A tiny brass thing on a faded leather strap, hidden behind an old clock only I ever dusted. She hadn't noticed it. Good. That key didn't open anything obvious. Not a safe, not a drawer. But it held the last story my husband ever told me, in whispers, when the morphine made him forget the pain, but not the truth. "You'll need this one day, Judy," he said, placing it in my palm. Not for the house, for the truth. I didn't ask. I just kissed his fingers. Back then I thought he meant it symbolically, the kind of thing a dying man says. But now I wasn't so sure. Kimberly had always been impatient, even as a little girl. If something wasn't immediate or shiny, she tossed it aside. She had her father's eyes, but none of his patience, none of his depth. I held the key now, warm from the sun through the window. I traced its edges. Something in me stirred. Not anger. Not yet. Just a pulse of quiet resolve. She may think she's taken everything, but she never learned how to see what really matters. The next morning I woke before the gulls. My hands moved without thought, the same way they always had for 40 years. Boil the water, grind the beans, pour gently, serve black, just like he liked it. There's dignity in routines, even when everything else is stolen from you. I sat at the small kitchen table, the one with the uneven leg, and took a sip. The bitterness grounded me. Outside, the beach stretched pale and empty. Soon, strangers would walk through my garden, touch the seashell wind chimes, call it charming. Real estate language always sounded like lies with perfume. I didn't cry. Not yet. Kimberly came down the stairs in a silk robe she hadn't paid for. Her heels clicked against the wood like punctuation marks. "You're up early," she said, voice still groggy. "Did you pack? We leave by noon." "I made coffee," I said. "There's some left." She didn't answer, just wrinkled her nose like the smell offended her. "I'll be in the city most days," she said, while scrolling through her phone. "So we'll get a part-time nurse. Don't worry, I've thought of everything." She hadn't thought of me, or my silence, or the fact that I wouldn't be going with her. I watched her leave the kitchen without a glance back. That robe used to hang on my closet door. She thought this was a move, but it was the beginning of something else entirely. Once Kimberly left for town, probably to sign more papers I hadn't seen, I stood and walked slowly to the hallway closet. I didn't need to rush. I already knew what I'd find. Behind the coats, past the photo albums she hadn't touched in years, there was a floorboard that creaked in a different tone. I knelt. My knees complained. I lifted it gently and reached inside. The old tin box was still there. Inside it, a single letter yellowed at the edges, written in my husband's careful script. I didn't open it. Not yet. Just held it close, heart knocking gently inside my chest. The key, that key, was meant for the lock behind the old shed, where the dune grass grows thick and wild. He'd built something there after the diagnosis, told me it was just storage. But he spent hours back there, hammering, writing, remembering. I never asked. I didn't want to make him feel like a dying man. Now I was the one dying slowly, not from illness, but from being erased piece by piece by the daughter I once held with trembling hands. I brushed dust off the tin and saw something that stopped me. On the side of the box, barely visible now, was a name carved in faint, shaking lines. Kimberly Judith Marsh. Her full name, her birth name, his handwriting. Why would he scratch her name there? And why mine beside it like a secret pact? I waited until late afternoon, when the sun dipped and shadows stretched long over the sand. Kimberly wouldn't be back for hours, probably at some overpriced cafe, ordering salads she'd barely touch. I took the key, the letter, and the tin box, wrapped in a shawl, and walked out to the back gate. The gate still creaked like it always had, a small familiar protest. The path behind the shed was overgrown now. Salt had weathered the wood, but the little door was still there, set low in the back wall, hidden behind stacked driftwood and an old tarp. You wouldn't even know it was a door unless you'd watched him build it. I knelt and slid the key into the lock. It turned like it had been waiting. Inside was dust, quiet, and a small bench made of pine. On the wall, a single-frame photo, our wedding day, and on the bench, another box. Oak, handmade, smooth to the touch. Inside it, a stack of documents, neatly labeled in his handwriting. A second will, a notarized letter, a copy of a deed, and beneath them all, a sealed envelope that read, "For Judith, when they forget who you are." I sank onto the bench, hands trembling, heart full. He knew. Even then he knew what might come. And he made sure I wouldn't be left with nothing, not even dignity. I returned just before sunset, shawl tight around me, the tin and oak boxes hidden beneath my coat. Kimberly was on the porch, talking too loudly on her phone. "Yes, beachfront, completely furnished. She's old but manageable. No medical issues. Just forgetful sometimes." Forgetful. I wanted to laugh or scream. Instead, I walked past her. She barely looked at me. "Mom, can you not slam the door?" she called behind me. "Buyers are coming tomorrow. First impressions matter." Her words hit like little stones, small but sharp. I closed the door softly. Inside, I placed both boxes on the table and sat down. My hands, these hands that had nursed fevers, cleaned bruises, taught her to braid her hair, now trembled not with age, but with restraint. I looked at my fingers, bent, veined, cracked. These were the hands that had sewn her dresses from scraps, that had packed lunches for school when we barely had groceries, that had written checks to cover her college tuition, never once asking for anything in return. And now I was just a burden with a forgetful mind and a house she could sell. She had forgotten everything but her greed. But soon, Kimberly would remember. Because when someone tries to erase you, you have to decide whether you'll vanish quietly or if you'll leave a mark they can't wipe clean. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of nerves, but because silence has its own sound, like a heartbeat echoing in a large, empty room. I listened to the old house breathe. The beams creaked like they always did when the sea air settled. Somewhere upstairs, Kimberly's heels thudded to the floor. She never learned how to move gently through a home. I lit a candle, like I used to when the power went out. The flame flickered on the boxes in front of me. His handwriting stared back at me, strong even now. I opened the sealed envelope. Inside was a letter longer than I expected. He'd written it over time. You could tell by the ink and slight changes in pen pressure. It wasn't poetic, but it was full of truth. He told me what he'd seen coming. how Kimberly had changed after he got sick, how the warmth left her voice, how she spoke of investments and care homes and maximizing property value. He'd consulted a lawyer quietly, redid the will, left the house, the car, and even the little boat to me, in my name only. But he hadn't told me then. "I didn't want to hurt you with suspicion," he wrote. "But I wanted to leave you protected, Judith, because even love blinds us, and I knew how hard it would be for you to see her clearly." I closed my eyes. He saw her clearly, and now, so did I. Morning arrived with the scent of synthetic perfume wafting down the stairs. Kimberly's signature, sweet, heavy, and overbearing. I was still at the kitchen table, both boxes in front of me, letter folded back into its envelope. She strutted in, heels clicking, phone in hand. "You didn't sleep again," she said, not really asking. "Well, it doesn't matter. The realtor's stopping by around 10. I'll need you out of the way for a bit." I didn't answer. She poured herself orange juice and took a seat across from me, finally noticing the oak box. "What's this?" she asked, reaching for it. I placed my hand over it, calm, firm. "Something your father left. For me." She tilted her head, annoyed. "Since when?" "He didn't mention anything in the will. I handled everything." "You handled the version you were given," I said softly. "Not the truth." Her eyes narrowed. "Mom, don't start with this. We've talked about—" "I haven't said a word," I interrupted. "That's been the problem." For a moment she looked unsure. A flicker. The little girl I used to soothe during thunderstorms peeked through. Then she rolled her eyes and leaned back. "Whatever this is, it won't change anything. The papers are signed. The house is sold." I looked down at the letter, then back at her. "You're right," I said. "The house is sold." I paused. "But not by you." She froze. "What do you mean, not by me?" she asked, voice brittle. I stood slowly, walked to the sideboard, and retrieved a small envelope, the one from the lawyer, the official one. I placed it gently on the table between us, like laying down a final card in a long, quiet game. I said, "Your father left everything to me. This house, the car, even the boat. He redid the paperwork months before he passed. In secret. I found it yesterday." Her hand hovered above the envelope but didn't touch it. She laughed, sharp and dry. "You're confused," she said. "You've been forgetting things. I knew this would happen." "No, sweetheart," I said, folding my hands. "I've just been remembering." I watched as her face shifted, annoyance curdling into uncertainty, then disbelief. "I had this house listed," she said. "It's in escrow." "No," I said. "You had a house you thought you owned listed. It's in my name, legally, fully, as of last month." She blinked, lips parting slightly. Her confidence, the thing she wore better than any designer dress, began to peel away. You're bluffing." I slid the deed across the table. Her name was nowhere on it. "This is fraud," she whispered. "No," I said. "What you did was fraud." She stood up, knocking her juice glass to the floor. It shattered like the lie she'd been living. And for the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me. Kimberly didn't move to clean up the glass. She just stared at the floor, breathing hard, hands clenched at her sides. I bent down, slowly, carefully, and picked up the largest shard, turning it in the light. "You should be careful with what you break," I said, gently placing it on the counter. "Don't lecture me," she snapped. "You had no right to keep this from me." "I had every right," I said, straightening. "I was your mother before I was anything else. I gave you everything I had, time, money, love, and still, you took what wasn't yours." She crossed her arms. "So what now? You think this makes you the good guy? You want revenge?" "No," I said. "I want peace, and maybe a little respect." Her laugh was bitter. "Respect? For what? Sitting in this old house, clinging to a dead man's memory?" "No," I said quietly. for surviving everything you've forgotten. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but fury. But something inside her was unraveling. That tight grip she always had on the narrative, slipping, thread by thread. You always thought you were smarter, she muttered. St. Judith, long-suffering wife. I did what had to be done. No, I said, finally stepping closer. You did what served you. There's a difference. She looked away. The silence between us was thicker than before, and on the floor, the juice seeped into the old rug. A stain, a reminder. Some things don't wash out. Kimberly stormed upstairs, and for the first time, I didn't follow. I let her be. Let her stew in the truth she'd tried so hard to bury. I walked into the hallway and caught my reflection in the mirror near the stairs. I didn't recognize myself at first. Not because I looked old, but because I looked still. Not afraid, not small. There was a time I used to avoid mirrors. After her father died, I couldn't bear to see what grief had done to me. My shoulders curved as if shame had weight. My eyes dulled, as if no one would ever look into them with love again. But now? Now I stood tall. I thought about all the women watching this story. Women like me. Women who gave and gave until their names disappeared from the deeds and the memories. I see you, I whispered to my reflection. I went to the linen closet and pulled out the deed, the notarized letter and the sealed will. I placed them in a folder and set them by the door. She would try to fight me, I knew that. She'd scream, maybe cry, maybe manipulate. But truth doesn't shout. It waits. It stands. It holds its ground, like I was doing now. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a mother chasing after her child. I felt like a woman defending her life. The house was quiet again, but not in the peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that crackles, when truths sit heavy in the corners and nobody dares to breathe too loud. Kimberly hadn't come down. I suspected she was pacing upstairs, looking for legal loopholes, calling friends who knew friends. But I was already one step ahead. I picked up the phone and dialed the number I hadn't used in years. Cynthia Myers, our old neighbor, retired attorney, widow, and one of the last women I trusted in this world. She picked up on the second ring. "Judith Marsh," she said, surprised. "I was just thinking about you yesterday." "I found the second will," I said. "The one Charles left me." I heard her shift on the other end. "You kept it all this time?" "I found it yesterday, along with the deed." He knew Kimberly would try something. She was quiet a moment. Then, "Do you want me to come over?" "Yes, I need a witness. And maybe a friend." "I'll bring both," she said, soft. I hung up and placed the phone down with care. My hands were steady now. Upstairs I heard Kimberly's door open, her steps quick and sharp down the hall. She didn't know Cynthia was coming. She didn't know the truth had already left my lips and entered someone else's ears. Secrets are heavy when you carry them alone, but once spoken, they start to set you free. An hour later, Kimberly came down in full makeup, red lipstick like armor, hair perfectly curled. She wore the navy dress she usually saved for meetings, the kind where she expected to win. She sat across from me, no greeting, just a smirk. "So what's your plan?" she asked, crossing her legs. "You'll flash some dusty paper and expect me to back down?" I met her gaze. "No, I expect you to listen." She scoffed. "To what? Oh, letters and fantasies. You don't know how the world works anymore, Mom. Everything is digital. Paper doesn't hold up." "You're wrong," I said. "This isn't about paper. It's about proof. And your father made sure I had it." "Dad always coddled you," she muttered, picking at her cuticle. "It's probably fake. Emotional manipulation. You've always been good at that." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The knock on the door answered for me. She looked up, startled. I opened the door and Cynthia stepped in, wearing a simple beige coat and holding her old leather satchel. "Cynthia Myers," I said. "Our family attorney for 15 years. You remember her, don't you?" Kimberly's face drained a little color. Cynthia smiled politely. I believe we met at your graduation. You were late because you lost your heels. Kimberly stayed silent, and in that moment I saw it. Not guilt, but fear. Cynthia took off her coat, laid her satchel on the table, and pulled out her glasses. Her movements were slow, deliberate, the kind that made you wait, and Kimberly hated waiting. So, Cynthia said, opening the folder I had prepared, let's take a look. Kimberly stood behind her chair now, arms crossed, eyes flicking between us like a child about to be scolded. I watched her hands. They trembled just slightly, a twitch in the thumb, a tell she didn't know she had. Cynthia examined the documents. First the deed, then the notarized will, then the letter. Her lips tightened. Well, she said finally, this is clean. Dated, signed, witnessed. This supersedes anything your daughter may have submitted. Kimberly stepped forward. That can't be right. There was no mention of this at the time. I handled everything. I paid for the funeral. You assumed control, Cynthia said, without raising her voice. But assumption isn't ownership. This is legal, Kimberly. You don't understand, she snapped. She's manipulating you. She's not well. She forgets things. I looked at her calmly. I forgot how much it hurts to be betrayed by your own blood, I said. But that's coming back to me now. Kimberly's face flushed, and for a moment she looked like a little girl again. Not the kind you feel sorry for, but the kind that slammed doors because she couldn't have her way. Cynthia closed the folder. This house, she said, belongs to your mother. Kimberly's breathing turned shallow. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I watched her shoulders rise, stiff as boards. Her control, the one thing she thought was absolute, was crumbling in front of her, and she didn't know how to lose quietly. No, she said finally, voice shaking. No, this isn't happening. This is my life. I made plans. I invested. I signed contracts. With a property that wasn't yours, Cynthia replied evenly. You may want to contact your realtor before you're liable for misrepresentation. You're siding with her? Kimberly spat. She's old. She doesn't know what she's doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said, standing. I'm standing up. She took a step back, as if the words hit her harder than she expected. She looked at me like I was someone else, not her aging mother in slippers, but a woman with weight, with voice, with spine. I gave you everything, I said. And you sold my home like a suitcase at a yard sale. But your father saw what I couldn't, and he gave me a chance to remember who I am. Her eyes glistened now. Not sorrow. Rage. You'll regret this, she said, almost whispering. You'll die alone. Cynthia stood beside me. No, she said gently. She'll live with dignity. And that, I realized, was the only thing I'd ever wanted. Not revenge. Just to be treated like I mattered. After Cynthia left, I stayed by the window. Kimberly sat outside on the porch steps, elbows on her knees, staring at the horizon like it owed her an apology. She hadn't said another word, but the silence between us now wasn't power. It was reckoning. I looked around the house, really looked. The chipped tile by the sink from when Charles dropped the Thanksgiving platter, the faded spot on the hallway wall where Kimberly had once drawn a unicorn in crayon. I'd painted over it, but the outline still peeked through when the light hit just right. This wasn't just a house, it remembered. And now, so did I. I opened the linen closet again and pulled out an old blanket, Charles's favorite, wool, frayed at the corners. He used to wrap it around both of us on cold beach mornings, whispering stories in my ear while the tide came in. I walked outside and draped it gently over Kimberly's shoulders. She flinched, startled, then looked up. Her eyes were red but dry. I didn't know he left you that will, she said. No, I answered. You didn't ask. We stayed like that for a while, mother and daughter sitting close but worlds apart. I wasn't always this way, she said, her voice barely there. I know, I whispered, but you let the world harden you. And you tried to take everything soft from me. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and forgiveness. We sat in silence long enough for the sky to start changing. That soft hour when everything turns cold, and even the broken things look holy. I waited, not for her tears, not for a scene, just for her to say something true. But the apology never came. She turned to me, lips parted like she might say, "I'm sorry," but instead she asked, "So what now?" Just like that, like we were business partners, like betrayal could be followed by a casual next step. I looked at her, really looked. She still had my eyes, but none of my softness. Somewhere between college and career, she had trimmed away everything tender. "What now," I said quietly, "is that I stay here, in my home." She nodded slowly, stiffly, like she was swallowing something bitter. "And me? That's your decision." I stood up and walked inside. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. Inside, the kitchen smelled like rosemary, the sprig I'd left drying above the sink finally letting go of its scent. I placed the blanket on the couch and sat, listening. She didn't follow. Outside, the steps creaked, then the sound of her heels on gravel. Leaving, not running, just gone. She didn't slam her car door either. Maybe that was something, maybe not. But dignity, I realized, isn't something others hand you. It's what you choose to keep, even when they try to steal everything else. That night I pulled out an old notebook, the kind with curled edges and ink-stained corners. It had been years since I wrote anything for myself. Not a grocery list, not a reminder, just thoughts. I lit a candle and let the flame speak for a while before I picked up the pen. "Dear Kimberly, there are things you don't know. Things I never told you because I thought love was protection, not truce. But maybe that was my mistake." I wrote slowly, letting the words settle before they left the page. I told her how her father and I used to dance in the living room when she was asleep, music low, his arms always warm. How he worried about her before the end, not because he doubted her intelligence, but because he saw how much she'd learned to hide her heart. I told her I missed the little girl who used to leave me folded notes in my coat pockets, all written in backward letters and glitter pen. And then I wrote the truth. "You hurt me. You sold pieces of me as if they were junk, but I still love you, and maybe one day you'll remember how to love me back." I didn't plan to mail it. Maybe I never would. But it helped somehow, putting ink to pain. I folded the letter and placed it in the tin box. Because not all truths need to be spoken to matter. Some just need to be written, so we don't forget who we are. 2 days passed. I kept the house quiet. No news, no television, just the sounds of home, the tick of the old clock, the sway of the wind chimes, the gulls calling like they always had. Kimberly hadn't called. I hadn't expected her to. But on the third morning, the phone rang. I stared at it for a moment before answering. "Mom?" Her voice was thin, strained, like someone trying not to cry in a public place. "I'm here," I said, steady. I didn't think it would go that far. "You sold my home behind my back," I said. "It went exactly as far as you meant it to." A pause. "I was scared," she said. "I've been carrying so much work, debt, pressure, and I thought I could fix everything if I just had one win." "This house wasn't a prize," I said. "It was your history and mine." She exhaled. I imagined her sitting in her car again, face in her hands like the girl who used to fall apart when her test scores weren't perfect. "I don't know how to come back from this." "You don't come back," I said softly. "You start over." She didn't speak for a while. Then just as the line clicked, I heard her whisper something I never thought I'd hear. "I miss you." Click, just like that. No apology, just an ache. But even ache is honest. That afternoon, I stepped outside to water the garden, the little patch of stubborn green I'd kept alive through droughts and heartbreaks. The hose kinked in the same spot it always did. The roses, Those Charles planted with Kimberly when she was 8 were beginning to wilt. As I bent down to clip the dry leaves, a voice startled me. "Judith?" I turned. It was Linda Chastain, realtor, gossip queen, and longtime neighbor. Behind her stood a well-dressed couple, sunglasses still on, holding lattes. "We were told there was a showing today," she said, looking down at my gardening gloves and dirt-streaked apron. "Not anymore," I replied. The couple looked confused. "I'm the owner," I added. "There's been a correction." Linda blinked, her smile flickering. "Kimberly told us everything was finalized. She said you were moving to a care facility." The humiliation burned, but I didn't flinch. "She was mistaken," I said, standing tall. "This house isn't for sale. Not now. Not ever." The woman stepped forward, squinting. "But the listing's still live. We drove 4 hours." I smiled kindly despite the ache. "Then I'm sorry you wasted the trip. But this home has roots deeper than a price tag." Linda turned red. "You should have told me. You should have asked me," I said. They left. Murmurs, quick steps, stiff shoulders. I turned back to the roses. Sometimes you're humiliated not by strangers, but by what your own child told them behind your back. But dignity is what you do after. The next morning I walked out to the mailbox. It sat tilted on its post, rust spreading like moss across the sides. Charles used to fix it every spring. Kimberly once painted it sky blue when she was 12. Now, a dull gray. Inside, bills, a seed catalog, and a cream-colored envelope with my name in neat, unfamiliar script. No return address. I opened it slowly, thumb grazing the edge like it might bite. Inside was a letter. Short, only a few lines. "Mrs. Marsh, I handled the recent listing. I had no idea your daughter acted without your consent. I filed a notice to withdraw the property from sale immediately. Please accept my apologies. And if you ever decide to sell, it would be an honor to represent you the right way. Daniel Hillman, broker." I held the paper a long time. It smelled faintly of ink and heat. It wasn't the apology I wanted, but it was the recognition I hadn't received in months. Behind every betrayal, there are people watching. Some speak, some stay silent. But even a stranger's respect can remind you of what your own blood forgot. I tucked the letter into my apron and turned back to the house. I wasn't just rebuilding dignity in whispers now. The world, or at least a corner of it, was listening. And this time, I was being seen. That afternoon, I returned to the living room and pulled down the old family photo that hung above the fireplace. Kimberly hated it, said it made the room feel dated, but I loved that photo. Charles in his corduroy jacket, me in a yellow dress I'd sewn myself. Kimberly, maybe 5, with one braid undone and a jelly stain on her collar. Her arms around both our necks like she never wanted to let go. I ran a cloth over the frame, watching the dust fall like quiet years. Where did that little girl go? The one who used to cry when I left for the grocery store, who collected seashells and left them on my pillow with handwritten notes. "For you, Mommy, so you smile when I'm not there." I wiped the glass gently, as if it were her cheek. Pain has a way of disguising people. But when you're still, really still, you can almost see who they used to be, before the world taught them how to want more than they needed. I hung the photo back on the wall, centered it, stepped back. It didn't just anchor the room, it reminded me who I was, who we were, and maybe who she could be again if she ever found her way back to softness. If. I didn't need that if to live, but I still carried it, like mothers do, quietly, just in case. Late that evening, I decided to drive to the market. Just milk and bread, nothing dramatic. But when I turned the key in Charles's old car, the one Kimberly said she'd already taken care of, it made a hollow, choking sound. Then nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. I lifted the hood, even though I didn't know what I was looking for. Just a tangle of parts and silence. That car had run for 20 years. Charles had changed the oil himself, always humming. She must have done something. I could feel it in my bones. Back inside, I went to the drawer where we kept the registration. Gone. So were the spare keys. My hands trembled, not from fear, but fury. Slow-burning, righteous fury. Kimberly hadn't just tried to sell the house. She'd tried to erase the last piece of him I still had. The car he built a life in, the one we drove to the hospital the night she was born. I sat down at the kitchen table, breath steadying. She wanted to leave me with nothing, but she forgot something important. You can't steal memory. You can't forge love. And you sure as hell can't silence a mother who's found her voice again. She thought she'd taken everything, but what she really did was set me free. The next morning, I called Roger, the local mechanic, old friend of Charles. He still called me Miss Judith, like I was a young bride with hair up in pins. Something's wrong with the Buick, I told him. She won't turn over. He came within the hour, grease already on his hands. I watched from the porch as he worked beneath the hood, muttering the way men do when they're piecing together truth from broken things. After 20 minutes, he came up, wiping his hands. "Well," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Looks like someone drained the oil and clipped the battery line." My stomach tightened. "That doesn't happen by accident, does it?" He shook his head, slow. "Miss Judith," he said softly, "someone wanted this car not to move, but I can fix her. I'll have her running by Friday." I nodded, silent. As he packed up, he added, "That husband of yours, he loved this machine. Kept her better than some men treat their wives." I smiled faintly. "He treated both of us with care." Roger paused. "Your daughter?" "She didn't." "She did," I said. "But I'm fixing it now. The car, my life, all of it." He looked at me, and there was something like respect in his eyes. Not pity, not concern, just respect. And I realized, when you stop hiding your truth, the world changes how it looks at you. Even the ones who only saw you as someone's wife now see you. That evening, I set the table for two, not because I expected Kimberly, but because hope, like grief, has muscle memory. I laid out the plates, mismatched but familiar. The fork with the bent tine, the napkin with a faint red wine stain. I cooked the lentil stew, her childhood favorite. Back then, she called it magic soup. The hours passed. The food cooled. The chairs stayed empty. I didn't cry. I just packed the stew into containers, stacked them in the fridge, and turned off the porch light. There's a grief quieter than tears, the kind that lives in empty chairs and uneaten meals. I went to the fireplace and lit the candle again, the same one from the night I wrote her letter. It flickered gently, steady. I sat down and opened my notebook. This time I didn't write to her. I wrote to myself. "You are still a mother. You are still a woman. You are still standing." It wasn't a mantra. It was a truth. Kimberly may never say she's sorry. She may never come back with softness in her hands. But I no longer needed that to know my worth. Some daughters forget. Some remember too late. But I would remember for both of us. Because even when love isn't returned, it can still be honored. 2 days later, Cynthia came back. No appointment, no papers. Just a knock at the door and a brown paper bag with lemon muffins. "I figured you could use something sweet," she said. We sat on the porch, the air thick with salt and sun. She took in the view like it belonged to her too. Maybe it did, in the way shared grief can stitch strangers into kin. "She called me," Cynthia said after a long pause. I looked up. "Kimberly?" She nodded. "Said I was helping you destroy her." I sighed. "Did she say anything else?" "She said you twisted everything, that you made her feel small." A bitter laugh escaped me. "She's so afraid of feeling small, she forgets she was once held in small arms." Cynthia leaned in. "You didn't twist anything, Judith. You just told the truth. And for people who live on lies, truth feels like violence." We sat with that. She reached into her bag, pulled out a yellowed folder. "I brought copies," she said. "Just in case she tries to contest anything. You're covered legally and morally." I took it from her, but more than the papers, I took her presence. Because that day, I realized something. Justice doesn't always arrive in courtrooms. Sometimes it arrives with lemon muffins and the quiet presence of someone who believes you. Someone who shows up, not for what you have, but for who you are. That night, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. The one where I kept old birthday cards, faded receipts from vacations, and a velvet pouch containing the necklace. Charles gave it to me our first year in the beach house. A simple silver chain with a small mother-of-pearl locket. Inside, a photo of Kimberly as a toddler, reaching up for the sky. I hadn't worn it in years. Kimberly borrowed it once for a college gala. She never gave it back. I assumed it was lost, but there it was, laid carefully on my nightstand that evening, the pouch neatly folded. No note, just the necklace. I held it in my hands and let the silence speak. Maybe she'd come while I was out watering the garden. Maybe she hadn't wanted to see me, just to return what she knew didn't belong to her. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. I sat on the edge of my bed and clipped the necklace around my neck. It felt cold at first, then warm, like memory, like faith. Maybe Kimberly still carried pieces of the girl I once knew. Maybe shame had finally started to chip away at the stone she'd built around herself. Maybe she wasn't ready to say the words, but she knew enough to give something back. And sometimes, the smallest returns carry the loudest echoes. It rained that night. Not a storm, just a steady, cleansing rain. The kind that makes the earth sigh. By morning, the sky had cleared and the light was soft, almost silver. I stepped into the garden with bare feet, the soil cool beneath my toes. The roses, the ones Kimberly and Charles planted together, had bloomed. 3 of them, full, blushing red. I bent down and touched the petals, still damp. For the first time in days, something inside me relaxed. Not everything had died in the soil of this family. Some things had survived, quietly, faithfully. As I trimmed one for the kitchen table, I noticed something tucked beneath the welcome mat. An envelope, no name, just a heart drawn in blue pen. Inside, a torn piece of notebook paper. I'm not ready to talk, but I'm listening now. K. That was it, but it was enough. I folded the note carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my bed, next to Charles's letter and my own. Maybe Kimberly wouldn't come knocking tomorrow. Maybe she'd never say sorry in the way I imagined. But something had cracked open, not in anger, in her, and in me too. Because when someone finally starts to listen, hope doesn't just return, it blooms. The next evening I set the table again. 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 cloth napkins, the ones I'd saved for holidays. I wasn't sure why I did it. Habit, maybe, or hope, dressed up like routine. I made chicken soup this time, simple, warm. The kind that fills the house with the smell of home before it fills the belly. Just as I placed the ladle in the pot, I heard it. Soft steps on the porch, no heels, just sneakers. Then a knock, not loud, not urgent, just uncertain. I opened the door. Kimberly stood there, arms crossed over a plain sweater, eyes rimmed red. She looked smaller, not in size, in spirit. "I can't stay long," she said, "but I stepped aside. "You don't have to explain," I said. "You're here." She walked in, hesitant, like someone stepping back into a childhood room after a long absence. She looked at the table, then back at me. "You set 2 places." "I always do when I hope." She pulled out the chair slowly, sat down without speaking. I served the soup. She took a spoonful, then another. Her shoulders dropped, and for the first time in what felt like years, we ate in silence that didn't hurt. Not every return needs fanfare. Sometimes the deepest healing begins with a pulled-out chair and the courage to sit in it. After dinner, we sat in the living room, the air between us fragile but no longer cold. Kimberly stared at the photo above the fireplace. Her voice was soft when she spoke. "Dad looks so young there." "He was," I said. "We both were." She glanced at me. "You never told me how you met." I smiled faintly. "I was 19. He came into my bakery every morning for 2 weeks and never bought anything. Just asked about the muffins. Why didn't he just say he liked you?" "Because," I said, "he didn't think he was enough yet. He wanted to be someone I could lean on." Her eyes welled, but she blinked it back. "You two made it look easy." "No, baby," I said gently. "We just didn't quit. Not when it got hard. Not when we felt alone." She swallowed, throat tight. "I think I forgot how to love without hurting." I reached for her hand. The same hand I once held crossing the street. The same one that pushed me away. But this time, she didn't pull back. "You can remember," I said. "It's still in you." She looked down at our hands. Her fingers curled slightly around mine. The moment didn't fix everything, but it opened a window. And sometimes, healing is just that. Letting a little light in after too many nights of dark. Kimberly stood in the hallway later that night, looking at the old clock. Her eyes drifted upward to the small brass key hanging just behind it. She turned to me. "That key. It's always been there, hasn't it?" I nodded. "Your father left it for me. Said I'd need it when I remembered who I was." She took a step closer. "What does it open?" "Something behind the shed. A door he built before he died." "And what's in there?" "Proof," I said, "of who really owned this house. But more than that, of how much he loved us, both of us." She looked at the key for a long time. "I never noticed it." "No," I said quietly. "You never looked." She winced. "I didn't want to see things that didn't serve me. I think I lived like that for years." I reached up and took the key down, placed it gently in her hand. She closed her fingers around it as if it were warm. "It's heavier than I thought. Truth often is." She looked at me, eyes shimmering. "I'm not ready to be forgiven." "You don't have to be," I said. "You just have to be honest." The key sat between us. Not just a tool now, but a symbol of what was nearly lost, of what might still be rebuilt. The next morning, just after sunrise, we walked to the back of the house together. No words, only the sound of birds waking, dew crunching beneath our feet, and the hush that follows when shame starts giving way to truth. Kimberly held the key tightly. She didn't dress up this time, just jeans and a sweater, hair pulled back the way she wore it as a teenager. The shed loomed in the mist, just as weathered as before. She paused at the hidden door, looked at me. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. "He built this for us. You deserve to see what he left." She bent down, inserted the key into the small brass lock, and turned it slowly. It opened with a soft click, like it had been waiting. Inside, the light was dim, but everything was preserved. The bench, the boxes, the framed photo of us on the mantel. Kimberly stepped in, her breath catching. "Is this where he came to die?" she whispered. "No," I said. "It's where he came to remember how much he lived." She moved to the shelf, ran her hand over a folder labeled in Charles's handwriting. "For Kimberly, when she's ready." Her lips trembled. "He wrote to me. He always believed you'd find your way back." She held the folder like it was a newborn, and maybe, in a way, it was. Not a life beginning, but a heart beginning again. Back inside the house, Kimberly sat at the kitchen table, folder in her lap, eyes swollen but open. She hadn't said much since we returned from the shed. She just held that folder like it was made of glass. "Do you want me to stay?" I asked softly. She nodded. I poured her tea, the chamomile kind she used to love when her heart was still a little girl's. She opened the folder with careful fingers. Inside, a letter from Charles. His handwriting, firm, slanted, unchanged. The way he wrote her name made me ache. "Kimberly, if you're reading this, then you've come back in some way. And that means everything. I watched her eyes move slowly. Tears welled again, but she let them fall this time. He had written about her childhood, her laughter, her stubbornness, about his fears, his regrets. You were never too much. You were just scared. And I wasn't there long enough to help you learn how to be soft and strong at the same time. But your mother was. She is. She looked up at me. He didn't hate me. He never did. She went back to the letter. Protect her, Kimberly. Not because she's fragile, but because she's the strongest woman I ever knew. And one day, if you're lucky, you'll become her. She folded the letter back slowly, placed it on the table, and laid her hand over it. It wasn't forgiveness. It was recognition. And sometimes that's the first step home. Later that afternoon, Kimberly stepped outside and returned with a folder of her own. It was thinner, newer, but just as heavy. I brought these the day I came, she said, placing it on the table. The final sale documents, the ones I never let you see. I didn't reach for them. She opened the folder herself, pulled out the contract. I was going to have you sign them, she admitted. Even had a pen in my purse. I thought if I kept you confused long enough, I could just move on. She looked down, ashamed. I don't even know who I became. You were surviving, I said gently. But survival without conscience turns into cruelty. She nodded. I don't want this version of me anymore. Then she did something I didn't expect. She walked to the stove, lit a match, and held the edge of the paper to the flame. The contract curled, blackened, turned to ash. She dropped it into the sink, watched it burn out. No drama, just release. She turned back to me, eyes clear. I don't want your house, Mom. I want your trust again. I want to rebuild, even if it takes the rest of my life. I rose slowly and walked to her, placed a hand on her shoulder. You can't undo what's been done, I said. But you can build something new. From the truth. The smoke curled upward, not destruction, but cleansing. The past burned, and from it something softer rose. The next morning I stood by the hall closet, the one that had always been mine alone. Inside, beneath a quilt, sat a small wooden box, older than most of the things in the house. I took it out and brought it to the kitchen, where Kimberly was sipping coffee quietly, staring out at the ocean like she used to as a child. I have something for you, I said, placing the box on the table. She looked at it with hesitation. You've given me enough already, she said. No, I replied. This isn't about debt, it's about legacy. She opened the box slowly. Inside, her baby bracelet, a photo of her with Charles on her first birthday. A locket I'd meant to give her when she turned 25, but never did. I kept everything, I said. Even when you forgot me. She touched each item like it might disappear. You believed I was worth remembering, she whispered. I always did. She looked up, tears silent now, more steady. Do you think he'd be proud of me? I think, I said gently. He already was. Even in the hurt, because love doesn't vanish. It waits. She clutched the box to her chest. And for the first time since Charles died, I saw my daughter. Not the woman who lied, who schemed, who forgot, but the girl who used to collect seashells for my smile. And maybe, just maybe, she was finding her way back. That evening, Kimberly asked to stay the night. I nodded. Quietly, I made up the guest room, her old bedroom, the one with the soft blue curtains and the bookshelf we built together. It hadn't changed much, though time had settled on everything like dust. She stood in the doorway, hands in her pockets. I thought you would have turned it into something else by now. No, I said. Some things don't need repurposing. They just need waiting. She stepped inside, ran her hand over the dresser, then sat on the edge of the bed. I used to think this room was small, she said. Now it feels like the only place I've ever really belonged. I sat beside her. It's always been here. She turned to me. Do you think we'll ever get back to who we were? No, I said honestly. But we can become something new, something real. She nodded quietly. I used to lie awake in here, wondering if I'd ever be strong like you. You were, I whispered. You just got lost. She leaned into me then. Not like a grown woman, not like a child, but something in between. The kind of closeness that grief makes sacred. I wrapped my arm around her, feeling her weight settle. Not as a burden, but as a beginning. Because healing doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it just knocks gently on a door you never stopped leaving open. Sunday came soft and slow. The kind of morning where the light moves gently through the curtains and the coffee tastes warmer than usual. Not because of the brew, but because of the company. Kimberly was already awake. I found her in the kitchen, barefoot, making toast. For once there was no tension in the air. No eggshells, no guarded words. Just the rhythm of healing. I found Dad's journal last night, she said, passing me a slice. Oh? I asked, taking it gently. He wrote about the day I was born. Said he'd never seen you stronger. He used to say you looked just like him, but loved just like me. She smiled. Maybe that's still true. We ate in silence after that. But it wasn't emptiness. It was fullness. A kind of peace that comes not from fixing everything, but from finally telling the truth and surviving it. Kimberly cleared the table without being asked. She rinsed the plates like it was a prayer. I stood at the window watching the garden sway in the breeze. She came up beside me. You kept it alive, she said, even when I tried to tear it all down. Because I knew one day you'd need to see it blooming. She rested her head lightly on my shoulder. I want to help take care of it now. I smiled. And in that moment, it wasn't just the garden that felt reborn. It was us. That afternoon, Kimberly sat across from me at the kitchen table with a pen in her hand and eyes full of resolve. I want to fix it properly, she said, not just with feelings, but with action. She slid a legal form towards me, one she had already begun filling out. A new version of her own will, and a revocation of her power of attorney over me, which she had once forced quietly into place. No more secret filings. No more decisions made for you instead of with you, she said. I'll keep a lawyer separate from yours. I want everything clear this time. I studied her face. Older now, softer too. There was no smugness in her expression, only a quiet urgency to do right. I want to leave the beach house in your name, she continued. And after, well, it should go to a charity you believe in, not me. I reached across the table, touched her hand. We can decide that together, I said. When the time comes, she blinked hard. I don't deserve that. Maybe not, I said. But we don't give love because someone earns it. We give it because it frees both of us. She placed her hand over mine. Thank you for not locking the door. I never did, I said. I just stopped standing in the doorway waiting. Outside, the ocean hummed like a lullaby. And the future, once taken from me, now felt wide open. That evening, Kimberly lit the porch light for the first time in years. A small act, a quiet ritual, but it meant something. I stood by the window, watching the glow reach out across the yard like an open hand. Inside, the house was calm. No shouting, no lies whispered through phone calls. Just the soft clink of dishes being dried and the hum of music playing low on the old radio. Kimberly came up behind me. I used to love this window, she said. At night, when it was the only light on the street. It made the house feel like a lighthouse, I replied, even when I felt lost. She nodded. It still is. I looked at her. She didn't flinch anymore. She didn't shrink from her guilt or puff up with pride. She simply was, present, honest, learning. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a seashell, small, smooth, familiar. I found this in my old jewelry box, she said. I think I collected it for you. I took it in my hand, the cool curve fitting perfectly in my palm. I kept the others, I whispered. Outside, the garden swayed gently. A few blossoms closed for the night, but the porch light stayed on, an invitation, a promise, that even after everything, this house was still home. And this mother's heart? Still open. Spring came early that year. One morning I stepped into the garden and gasped, not at a single bloom, but at all of them. Every rose bush, every stubborn stem that had once clung to life in silence, now burst with color. Red, yellow, white, like forgiveness in flower form. Kimberly came outside holding 2 cups of tea. She handed me one, and we stood side by side, watching the petals tremble in the breeze. "They look like they've forgiven me," she said. "They don't forgive," I replied. "They just keep blooming, no matter what." We walked slowly through the garden. She knelt to pull a weed, not caring about the dirt on her jeans. I trimmed the dead heads, taught her how to do the same. And then we sat, 2 women, mother and daughter, scarred and stitched back together, on the old bench Charles built with his bare hands. The locket I wore caught the sun. She noticed. "May I see it?" I opened it. One side, her photo as a baby. The other, an old note Charles once wrote. "She'll return to you. When the world breaks her down, your love will build her back." Kimberly reached over and gently closed the locket. "I'm still learning, Mom, and I'm still here." The wind moved gently through the garden. Nothing more needed to be said. Love, like roots, grows quiet and deep, and when the time is right, it blooms.